The text goes through the paramita, the six paramita. These are the six transcendent qualities needed to attain to Buddhahood. It is not merely meditation which gains us Buddhahood, but the cultivation of various qualities. Okay, I'll leave the reason why they are considered transcendental until we get to wisdom, which explains what makes these particular qualities transcendent. But in the meantime, he starts off by saying that the supreme generosity is non-attachment. So this morning we were dealing with attachment and the difference between attachment and genuine love. So we dealt with that a little bit this morning. And here again, he's saying that the real generosity is that we don't cling to anything, holding it as mine. And that therefore we have this ability. Really, you have so many cats in this country. Oh, it's the same one, but there are many. I've seen them wandering around. This is an especially beautiful one. Oh, yes, but some people are allergic to cats, so out he goes. The ability not to cling to things as me and mine. This is a genuine generosity, that things don't, as we might say, we don't have sticky fingers, that everything catches onto us and we hold onto it. As an example of this, this feeling of allowing things just to flow in our, as far as giving is concerned, is that of a Hindu Swami that we knew, who was a very good friend of the nunnery. His name was Swami Ramanand, and he had a very simple ashram, not so far from where Taisita Rinpoche's monastery is. And it was all made with mud brick. And he himself had been a disciple of the great Hindu saint Ramana Maharshi. He was from South India. But he himself, unlike Ramana Maharshi, who was like a jnani yogi, he was himself a great, he was very devotional. Very, very, very sweet man. Anyway, he lived very, very simply, but he had many students, especially from the Punjab, which is a fairly affluent state. And often they would go abroad, and then they would bring nice gifts back from different countries to give to him, which you couldn't get in India, so they were special. And so they would present their gifts to Swamiji, and he would be so happy to get it. And he would I was there, he would unwrap it and he would look at it and his eyes would gleam and he would be so excited, and then they would tell him what to do with it, and he would examine it and really enjoy it. But knowing him, you knew that along with his delight in this gift was the thought, wow, this is wonderful. Who can I give it to? Because next thing he would call somebody up and he'd say, here, would you like this? He never kept anything. everything just slid. And his delight in receiving it, he didn't sort of, oh, I don't want this, I'm above this, you know, I'm a renunciate, take it away. It wasn't like that. Somebody gave him something, he would delight in it. But because he delighted, he wanted to give it to someone else to also delight. And so he was a perfect example of the supreme generosity is non-attachment. He just, you know, things flowed through him. And so it's again, as generosity in itself comes in many forms. It's the willingness to share, not to hold on to too much, thinking this is mine, this is mine, I'm not going to let you have any of it. This is a big problem, as we all know. So it's the ability to delight in sharing. What can you say? You know, not holding on to something thinking this is all mine and I've got to have it all for myself and you can't have anything. This is on many, many levels. The delight in giving also. We give money, we give material objects. Giving material objects means not just that we give things which we don't want or that we've outworn, but also things which, like the Swami, delight us. And so therefore, because it delights us, we think it might delight someone else. That opening of the heart, not just giving the bits we don't like. And giving ourselves, giving our time. If people are in distress, being there for them. And giving our skills. For example, the very fact that we have all come together now and gathered here at this kibbutz, and that, you know, you have seats and cushions to sit on in this very lovely environment, is the result of so much hard work from people working in the background. As volunteers, they are not being paid for it. They have other things to do, but they're giving up their time to bring things together in order to share with so many people. So also one very beautiful Dharma giving is to give our service. I think many of you have skills. Some of you even have time. Hopefully some of you might have the inclination. The desire to help. Because, you know, in Israel, as around so much of the rest of the world, Dharma groups are not supported by big organizations. They are not supported by the government. They are not supported by the Vatican. They are supported by themselves. And they're usually just on the edge. And they manage to keep going because of the generosity of people who maybe they have not much money, but they have some skills, they have some time, and they offer themselves. That is really the supreme generosity, is the generosity of giving the Dharma. So it doesn't just mean someone like me who comes along and sits here and goes yak, yak, yak. It means all the people in the background who have been, you know, it all depends. You are interested in dependency. Well, I am dependent on all these people in the background who have come together to work to make events happen. And not just an event like this, but week by week by week, keeping it going, keeping the Dharma alive. If those people didn't volunteer their time and their services, there would be no Dharma. You could get it on your, YouTube, and you could read books, but there would be no coming together of groups, no ability to invite people from outside to come and teach you, because there would be nobody working behind the scenes to make this happen. So, although these people are usually invisible, they are very much there. And normally they're overworked because there are not enough people coming forward to offer. Some of you already are working very hard for your own groups, and in which case, well done, keep going. But for some of you who maybe, have got time, have got the expertise, have got the interest, maybe you could step forward and offer to help. This is a great generosity. It's also a very karmically auspicious thing to do. And you don't have to look all so serious about it. It's also a very joyful thing to do. To offer, to help and work on behalf of the Dharma, which benefits not only oneself, but benefits many, many people. It is a beautiful thing to do. People are always wondering how to use their time to do something which will be of benefit to others. This is a beautiful way to benefit others. So those of you who are not involved but have the time and opportunity, think about it. Really, because not just in Israel but everywhere, it's the same problem that, we have these Dharma centers, but to keep them going needs a lot of help from the people. They don't just work on themselves. They need a workforce, a happy workforce, who work together happily and harmoniously, but they need help. So think about that. That is also a very important aspect of this paramita of generosity. Of course, you will work without any attachment, because the highest giving is non-attachment. But with the joy in serving the Dharma is a very great joy. And that involvement brings a measure of satisfaction to our lives, which personally I think is very important, especially in a non-Buddhist country, to keep the Dharma light really shining brightly. So please do think about that. Well, again, he's saying the paramitas, for those who don't know them, are generosity, ethical conduct, patience, enthusiastic effort, meditation, and wisdom. So he is going through these paramitas here, but giving them each a little twist. Everybody knows the traditional explanation of each of these qualities. So he's putting a different slant on it. I think he has a little bit sense of humor. Like, you know, the highest conduct is to be in disharmony, you know, and it gets all these nice little monks going, well, I thought the Buddha said harmony was so important in this world, you know, and here he's saying you've got to be in disharmony. So like this. So the supreme ethical conduct, the supreme moral conduct is to pacify one's mind. Well, you see, it gets to the root, because our mostly ethical conduct is how to deal with one's physical and verbal conduct in the world. That is ethics. And so he's going to the root of it, because our speech and our actions depend on our mind. So if we pacify our mind, then our speech and our actions will likewise be peaceful and ethical. So he's going straight to the point here. People act in unethical ways. In Buddhism, I'm sure most of you know, but in case you don't, there are 5 basic, every religion has its ethical conduct. And in Buddhism, the basic ethical conduct for everybody is the 5 precepts. These 5 precepts are based on how to live in this world harmlessly, so that even if we don't do any good, at least we can start by not doing any harm. And it's like if we are building a garden, you know, we are growing the Bodhi tree in our heart, then first we have to put a fence around to stop any animals coming in and uprooting our little sapling Bodhi tree. So this fence around our little plot in our heart is our ethical conduct. Shamatha also, the ability to calm the mind, depends first on our ethical conduct, that our ethics should be pure, so then our mind becomes more peaceful. If we are being ethically out of control, we cannot expect to sit down and have a peaceful mind. So first we have to take care of our physical and verbal actions, although, as Atisha says, these depend ultimately on having a peaceful mind. So the two go together. But these ethical rules, at the end, on Saturday afternoon, I've been asked to do a refuge ceremony. So I'll talk about that here because we're dealing with ethics. So in Buddhism, the entry onto the path, the doorway which leads onto the pathway, is taking refuge. This is something which from the time of the Buddha has been considered to be the induction to onto the Buddhist path. It doesn't mean that people cannot, of course, practice and use the techniques and so forth without committing themselves as being a Buddhist. Of course, many people from many religions, including Muslims in India at least, many Muslims do Vipassana courses to make them better Muslims. And many Catholics do Buddhist meditation to make themselves better Catholics. Many secular people do Buddhist meditation just to make themselves feel better and be better human beings. So there's nothing wrong with taking Buddhist techniques and Buddhist ideas. Most of these, you can't say Buddhist. They're just enlightened common sense. I mean, obvious, if you think about it. I mean, certain things like, you know, the doctrines on no self, etc., maybe you have to take a bit of a jump with that one. But most things are very obvious when you think about it. But in order to commit to actually following a Buddhist path, then one starts by taking refuge. Refuge, of course, is in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. And okay, so the refuge ceremony which we're going to do on Saturday will be in English. This is because, I mean, personally, I have taken a refuge formally in, in Tibetan, in Sanskrit, in Chinese, and in Pali. And none of those languages were particularly, anything which I knew at the time. So most people, when they take refuge, are taking refuge in a language they don't understand, with the idea that it must mean something to somebody. So the point is that, honestly and truthfully, when the Tibetans took Buddhism into Tibet, when the Chinese took it into China, when the Koreans took it into Korea, etc., the first thing they did was to translate it all into their own language. Marpa, the translator, the teacher of Milarepa, he knew Sanskrit. But Milarepa, he didn't know Sanskrit. He did everything in Tibetan. So he understood what he was saying. And so you do your prayers here in Hebrew. So you know what you're saying. This is very sensible. There are certain things which are very special, which can be said maybe in Tibetan or in Sanskrit, but in general, in order to really touch us in our heart, we have to know what we're saying. And to know what we're saying basically means we should say it in a language which speaks to us, which is usually our own language. However, I don't know Hebrew, so you're going to have to do it in English. But it's a commitment, and most people here either are not Buddhist, in which case that's fine, or if they are Buddhist, they've already taken refuge. It's important to recognize you're not taking refuge in me. I do not become your guru, heaven help. You do not take me as your lama, and you do not take on my lineage as your lineage. It's nothing to do with me. I'm just a conduit. You are taking the refuge is in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. And so even if one has taken refuge before, one can take it again if you want. Because one is putting seeds into that good old Alaya consciousness, that substratum consciousness. You're sticking seeds in there. So that, which is why it's important to take refuge every day by yourself. Because it means that next lifetime, very quickly one will encounter the Buddha Dhamma again and not waste time. So the refuge will be taken, but along with the refuge will be the 5 precepts will be offered. So this is, again, they are not commandments. The Buddha is not sitting up there with with a vajra about to smite you should you break something. It's not that. They are actually called rules of training. They're rules of training to help us as guidelines for how to lead our life. And even though people are usually already keeping them, it helps to take them as a commitment because it reminds us, oh, wait a minute, I have a precept about that. And also it's regarded that if one takes it formally, then the very fact that we are keeping them, even though we were keeping them before, that now we're keeping them, it makes very positive karma, more than if we don't take it as a formal commitment. But again, this is up to you. If you don't want to take precepts, then you don't need to take them. It's in English, so you know what you're saying. So the first precept is the most important one. In Buddhism, the most important precept is about not harming. And so, therefore, the first precept is the one which, when people think, oh, he leads a bad life, mostly they're thinking about harming.
The precepts are on page
Oh, wonderful. Okay, great. Well, that's good. Okay, so the first precept is not to take life. And this means not just human life, but all sentient life. Sentient means having consciousness. So in Buddhism, it means human beings, animals, creatures that live in the seas and the lakes and the rivers, beings that live in the sky, insects, and all beings seen or unseen. So it means anything which has consciousness, because it is understood that even if one is, an ant or a mosquito, life is very precious for that ant or mosquito. And, do we have the right to deprive it of life unless it's totally essential? We squat a mosquito and think, but we've just taken the whole life of another being, which was very rich and meaningful if one was a mosquito. And we must remember that even mosquitoes have Buddha nature. It's not just human beings who have Buddha nature. All beings have Buddha nature. Okay. Okay, does this mean we have to be vegetarian? Obviously not, because many of your teachers are probably not vegetarian if they're Tibetan. The Buddha himself was a monk who carried on the practice of wandering around receiving alms, as they do still in many of the Theravadan countries. And so therefore it was considered that one should not, say, you can't go on alms round and say, I'm sorry, but I'm gluten intolerant and I'm a vegan. You have to accept what anybody offers you. And so therefore the Buddha said that one could eat the meat if one had not killed it oneself, one had not asked for it to be killed on your behalf, and that as far as you knew, it was not killed on your behalf. Of course, this is sophistry. But anyway, that rule is there. And nowadays, more and more, of course in Tibet it was hard, it was, there wasn't much growing there, it was a very high climate and very cold. But now that the Tibetans have been out from Tibet in exile for the last 60 years in a highly vegetarian country such as India, they don't really have too much excuse, except they like meat. But more and more now, especially in recent years, they have becoming the monasteries. First of all, the nunneries became vegetarian. Many, many nunneries became vegetarian. Our nunnery, right from the start, was vegetarian. In fact, the nuns themselves, the first group of nuns we got, asked if it could be. And it always has been. But many nunneries were vegetarian, and now more and more monasteries, including the very big monasteries down in the south of India with thousands and thousands of monks. Usually the rule is that within the monastery you don't take meat. What you do outside is up to you. But also there are groups of young Tibetans going around and showing horror movies on industrial farming and animals being raised for slaughter. And this also moves the Tibetans very much, and so many of them now have become vegetarian. More and more. In the Mahayana countries, such as China, Taiwan, Korea, Vietnam, Usually, if you're a Buddhist, you are vegetarian, because the Mahayana, several Mahayana sutras speak out against meat eating. And so in the Mahayana countries, they usually are vegetarian. In the Theravadan countries, they usually are not. So I cannot say that being a vegetarian is part of it, although obviously if one is thinking that all beings are our mother, we cannot then sit down and eat our mother, you would think. Maybe you'd like to do yes. So leaving aside the psychological implications of that one, so I mean, I feel in a country where there is so much choice, there is really no justification for plugging into an industry which causes so much endless sufferings for so many millions of sentient beings. Because of course animals suffer. I mean, anybody who has a pet knows that animals have feelings just as we do. You know, I mean, it's ridiculous to think that like they're some kind of, mindless, piece of meat. Of course they have feelings. Of course they feel terror. Of course they feel fear. Of course they have all these, same feeling that we would have in those circumstances. And to inflict that on them when it's not even necessary is, when we're talking about universal compassion and we sit down and eat an animal that has died quite unnecessarily to feed us when we could eat something else. It doesn't seem justifiable. But in the end, I cannot say that, that the Dharma is very clear on that, and that you each have to make up your own mind on that one. So then the second precept is about not taking what is not given. So this basically means stealing. And obviously, just we all have our property, we don't appreciate it if somebody takes it. I mean, that is obvious, that we should not take something which belongs to somebody else without their permission. But I think it also extends to lending. When we borrow something, we should give it back, including books, DVDs, CDs, and we should give them back in as good a condition as we received them, and take as much care of somebody else's possessions, more care, than if it were our own. We should be scrupulous, because as we don't like, to lend something and then it never comes back and we have to keep asking or whatever, then likewise the other people feel the same. So we should be careful. I mean, often, even in our nunnery, we have a small we have a large Dharma library, but we also have a small library of just secular books. And all the people that come to visit us and stay with us are Dharma people and friends. But still, somehow books get wings and fly away. Where have they gone to? Who took it? Nobody, I'm sure, was intentionally trying to, become a thief. But it's definitely DVDs get lost. And books get lost. Or you lend something to somebody and then somebody says, oh, wow, that looks interesting. Can I just borrow it? And that's the end. It's gone on. So we should be careful. We should be careful. And we should be scrupulous that if we borrow something, we return it. And not become, unmindful of that. Oh yeah, well you can download books and films, so you're not taking it from somebody. Oh, you mean the copyright kind of thing? Well, that's up to you, each one to their own conscience. I think if you're an author or you know, have produced something, you might feel about that very strongly. But it's again, you know, how scrupulous are we going to be with our conduct? I mean, that wasn't written into the Vinaya because they didn't have that sort of thing in those days, but we can take it as an extension, you know? How honest are we going to be? I have to be a bit careful here because somebody downloaded hundreds of books onto my Kindle. And I didn't ask I didn't ask too carefully where they came from. Cyberspace. But most of them were old books, which I think didn't have any copyright.
I feel better now.
But anyway, so not taking the life of a sentient being, not taking that which has not been given. For example, one time, actually, a Catholic nun, she came to visit me when very early days in India. And so she brought with me from Delhi all these tins of Amul cheese, which this kind of processed cheese, which in those days was a great treasure. And so I thought, oh, I will offer this to my Lama Kamcha Rinpoche. So he wasn't there, but I made this kind of Leaning Tower of Pisa of all these tins of cheese and left them there. And then the days went by and they were still sitting there. And so I said, Rinpoche, why don't you like cheese? And he said, well, I thought you must have left them for me, but you haven't offered them. So I can't take it. So then I said, oh, Rinpoche, look, they're yours. And he said, thank you. And they disappeared. But that is the scrupulousness of it, not taking what is not given. I hadn't actually given it to him. And so he couldn't take it, right? The third precept, which is a very important precept, is the precept about sexual misconduct. Buddhism on the whole is not very hung up about sex. Unlike many of the Abrahamic religions, which when you talk, at least in Christianity, when you talk about somebody who's in sin, they usually mean some kind of sexual misdemeanor. In Buddhism, you know, apart from monks and nuns, who of course are celibate, so that's then dealt with. For lay people in general, the idea of sexual misconduct means that we do not use our sexual energies and urges in a way which could cause any harm to anyone, ourselves or others. That we are scrupulous about our sexual conduct. And if it's not harming anyone, then it's okay. In general, really there isn't that much interest in who you're sleeping with, as long as you're not doing something which will harm anyone. So, like adultery would harm someone, probably. If if you were cheating on somebody, like your wife or your husband, and they didn't know, and they would be hurt if they didn't know, or that you're exploiting somebody for your own sexual satisfaction, and that could in any way hurt them or harm them. That's what it's against. It's about being mature and responsible about sexuality, so that one has harmonious relationships which do not cause any harm to anybody. That by repercussions, that nobody would be hurt by your actions as far as you can possibly avoid it. So that's what is meant by, I mean, in the traditional, very, very traditional text, it goes on a whole list of women that you can buy or you can't buy, etc., etc. I mean, dealing with very ancient social norms. But basically it means, again, not harming. I mean, so obviously rape and this sort of, I mean, it goes without saying. But not just that. Any kind of relationship which is exploiting another for one's own satisfaction would be considered unwholesome and unskillful and karmically very negative. So one each has to look into one's own heart and one's own mind to see how one is acting. Then the fourth precept is about speech. Because we are the one animal on this planet who talks. And although other animals have means of expression, nothing compared with human beings who rely so much on verbal communication. Animals communicate, but they communicate on a different level with each other. We mostly rely on language. So language brings us together, and of course language also divides us, because there are so many languages. But nonetheless, because we are affected by others' speech, we should be very, very careful. So normally, right speech is divided into speech, first of all, which is truthful, but kind, and non-divisive, and also meaningful. So it is against lying and slander and divisive speech and endless, meaningless gossip, idle talk. So speech should be truthful. We shouldn't try to cheat people or lie to people. People should be able to trust what we say, that as far as we know, this is the truth. But at the same time, it should be kind as much as possible. Because some people really pride themselves on their truth. But that truth is often a criticism, or, it is not kind, it's not healing speech. So we should be careful as much as possible to speak truth which is kind. I mean, I sometimes say here that, I was born during the war in 43. And so in England at that time, everything was on ration. Food was on ration. You couldn't just go into a shop and buy food. You had to have a ration card, and there was a ration for dairy, there was a ration for bread, there was a ration for meat, there was a ration card, and you had to tear off the pages, and they would cross them off. And there was also a ration for clothing. So you, again, couldn't just go into a shop and buy it. You had to, it was all rationed. And because my mother, who was a widow, had 2 growing children, my brother and I, to bring up, most of our clothing ration went on us, because we were growing and she had to buy clothing for us. So she didn't have, for years, she never had anything new. I mean, you have to understand this to understand this story, right? That she never had anything for herself. The ration was always used for us. But then one day, she decided to splash out for herself, and she went and bought herself a new coat. And so she hadn't had, as I say, anything new for years. And now suddenly she had this new coat, and she put it on. And she said to me, "So what do you think?" And I said, "It makes you look fat." Which was true. And her whole face fell. She took it off. She put it in the wardrobe. She never wore it again. And so at that point, I recognized that there is a difference between true and kind. I could have said, "Oh, what a lovely color." that was also true. So we have to be careful with our speech, because as the Tibetans say, you know, I mean, I don't know, in English we say sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can never harm me. But the Tibetans say sticks and stones can only break your bones, but harsh speech can tear a man's heart to pieces. And that's much more true. We remember so much more the nasty things people have said to us than the good things. When people say harsh things to us, it cuts our heart to pieces. And very often people use the harshest speech towards those they love the most. Couples, parents with children. I knew a lady, she was Taiwanese, and she was very attractive, extremely intelligent. She ran her own business, and very accomplished woman. But she was seriously depressed. And eventually she discovered it was because in her mind, at the back of her mind, she always heard her mother screaming at her, "You are so ugly and so stupid, and you'll never get anywhere." And that's what she heard. At some point her mother had been angry with her and she shouted at her. And so in her mind was always the idea that she was ugly and that she was stupid and that she would never get anywhere and no one would ever love her. I'm sure her mother said beautiful things to her sometimes, but she didn't remember that. She only remembered that. It was playing in her mind the whole time. When people said that they loved her, she didn't believe it because she was too ugly and stupid to be loved. So we have to be so responsible with our speech. You know, we say something in a moment of anger or irritation, and it's like a knife in somebody else's heart. So really, each one of us has that responsibility to be very, very careful. It's no good afterwards saying, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean that." The knife's already gone in. So our speech should be truthful, yes, but it should also be kind, and it should not be divisive. Divisive means saying something to somebody else, "Oh, so-and-so said this about you," or telling somebody something bad about somebody else to divide them. Our speech should be bringing people together in harmony and creating harmony in our society, in our family, in our workplace. It's very important that we should use our power of language to bring people together rather than push them apart. This is also a very important part of this precept about language. We try the best we can, you know. I mean, as I say, with all these precepts, we do the best. You know, we don't always fulfill them, but we're trying. At least the aspiration is there to do the best we can and to be more conscious of our actions and our speech. So the fourth subsection of speech is about idle talk. And so this means gossip and chatter and just endlessly wasting people's time by chattering away without really much substance or much meaning. Some people are endlessly just talking. It doesn't really add up to anything much and just disturbs the mind of other people. So when we speak, we should at least have some content to it and something which is of some benefit, rather than just endlessly, mindlessly chattering away for the sake of hearing ourselves speak. I mean, it's sort of like, you know, you have a television on in the background just jabbering away, and, you know, all these kind of talk shows and things, you know, which are just a distraction for the mind. not really adding anything. So we should be careful with our speech. It's a very sacred trust. We are the only animal, the only mammal who uses this. And so we should be careful. And many people are not very conscious of their speech. You know, often if somebody plays back a recording of someone speaking, the person who is speaking doesn't recognize their voice even. Who's that? That's you. Never. One master recommended that sometimes it's as if we stand outside ourselves, as one of his training in mindfulness. That it's as if we stood outside ourselves and just listened to ourselves as we speak. Not changing our way of speaking, but just listening. Because it's not just the words, but it's the tone. And we are normally not even conscious of the way we're speaking and the tone of speaking and the words we're using. So to become as if we were outside ourselves listening to ourselves speaking. How does it sound? These are all ways also to train ourselves to become more mindful. Mindful doesn't just mean being in the moment. Mindful means being in control of our actions, of body and speech, as well as more conscious of our mind. It means just knowing what's going on while we're doing it, and having an intention to lead a wholesome life, a life which is filled with positive actions of body, speech and mind, and to recognize the negative and to deal with that. Uproot the weeds and cultivate the good plants. And we can't do that unless we're more conscious of what we're doing and we have a framework in which we are working. So this is what the precepts are doing, that they are helping us to have guidelines. So the fifth precept is the precept against any intoxicants which cause the mind to lose control. Because I don't know in Israel, but certainly in other countries of the world, so many of the crimes are committed by people under the influence of alcohol and drugs. And I was reading in a newspaper in England that most of the emergency wards, part of the hospitals, at night, 95% are dedicated to accidents and other things which are occurring due to alcohol. You know, people go on these binge drinking and, they get in cars and then they crash up. And they said if they didn't have to deal with all the alcoholics and the drug addicts, then, the actual people who are really ill, like had heart attack or strokes or whatever, is minimal compared with 95%, which is caused by alcohol and drugs. So that's a terrifying amount. So it's not an unimportant precept. The precept not to become intoxicated by alcohol or drugs. Because also Buddhism is about total sobriety, totally being the master of our mind and not the slaves of our mind. And so therefore it's very important that we should be completely awake within ourselves and not under the control of this intoxication. So therefore, the fifth precept is about not becoming drunk or under the influence of drugs. So these precepts are very basic precepts in all Buddhist schools. And so, as I say, we will... these will be given if anybody is interested. I mean, if you're not interested, then we won't give them. If you are interested, then we can. As I say again, it's all translated into English, so at least everybody knows what they're saying. And they are not commandments. They are not, you know, it's guidelines for us to try to bring our life in conformity with our beliefs that, you know, we are here for the happiness of all sentient beings, not to cause them more harm. So that is the precepts on ethics. But as Atisha here is saying, all of this really depends on having a peaceful mind. So we need to pacify our mind, to make our minds quiet, so that naturally our speech and our behavior will likewise be peaceful. Peaceful mind, peaceful world. Our conduct will not be peaceful, our world will not be peaceful as long as our minds are not peaceful.
About the first vow, I was wondering, in the last year or maybe some more, there is all this exposure of all the eggs and meat industry, which you can see actually how all the animals are being slaughtered and tortured, and eventually also get killed when they are not useful anymore, just for eggs and meat. So I was wondering, now that we know it and our eyes are not covered anymore, is there any reference of Tibetan Buddhism to this?
No. So she's expressing that nowadays we know very well that apart from animals being killed for their meat, they are also being exploited for eggs and for milk, and in many ways the dairy industry and the chicken rearing and the suffering that these animals go through nowadays. Before it was easier, you know, there were just a few cows wandering around, they were milked and they were okay. Nowadays, of course, it's a huge industry, and the animals suffer very, very much by very, very difficult ways in which they are kept without any concern at all for their well-being, just exploited completely. And so therefore she is inquiring if in Tibetan Buddhism it brings this up. Of course no, because in Tibet that isn't how it was. I mean, up until very recently, when you know, the milk production and egg production became a whole industry, it was just on farms. And so, you know, you had your chickens running around, and then they would give off eggs, and then people would take them, and then you had your cows wandering off into the meadows and coming back and being milked. I mean, when I was a child, I often lived on a dairy farm, and you know, the cows were, you know, happy enough. They liked being milked. They always had people, certain people, cows liked certain people to milk them, but they didn't mind. And now, of course, this has all very much changed, and they're being packaged as if they were completely inanimate, with no feelings, with no anything, you know. And of course, but again, this is something which is up to each person's conscience. There is no way, of course, because these rules were made 2,500 years ago, that it says you must do this and you mustn't do that. And so for each person, it's up to their own conscience how they respond to that. But as much as possible, I think it's true that if one sees that and feels that, then it is better not to endorse it, even tacitly, by you're buying these products. But in the end, it's part of your own conscience and your own choices. I mean, it's not laid down like that. It's not so fundamentalist as that. Each one has their own choice how they're going to deal with this problem. The byproducts. Well, of course, in the Mahayana Buddhism, this becomes easy because in countries which are affected, she's saying that in the sutras it does say, the Buddha says, not only should you not eat meat, but also the byproducts of animals. And in the Mahayana countries, this works because there they don't have dairy products, and they don't have cows. So that's why in Chinese and Korean, etc., they eat a lot of soy. And they don't, the Buddhists don't eat eggs or meat. So therefore they keep that precept. The Tibetan diet mostly depended on meat and yogurt and butter. And so these Tibetans today, even though they're in India, find very difficult to give up, because it's also, not only do they like it, but it's also a part of their identity. But you're not Tibetans, so therefore you don't have to do everything the Lama does. Okay, what about drugs such as marijuana for sick people? Is marijuana good for sick people? Well, then use it. Huh? Yeah, no. Huh? What? Well, she said, well, since all people are inherently sick. Okay, oh dear. I mean, these are not questions you ask nice little nuns. So they're asking, are flings or one-night stands considered as sexual misconduct? Such encounters are a mutually agreed upon exploitation of the other to satisfy one's own desires. Would they negate the precept? If you do break this precept, what action is necessary to correct this? Do you retake the vow? So again, I mean, if it is genuinely an agreed upon arrangement, and one is at the same time very careful, for example, the male should definitely use a condom so that there are no repercussions of the female becoming pregnant, and so forth. You have to be responsible. Then, or disease. I mean, responsible sex doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a lifelong commitment, but it does mean it has to be responsible. And thinking not just that night, but the future repercussions to make sure there wouldn't be any. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it really. That's not the point. The point is that one is using somebody for one's own pleasure without any consideration for them and their feelings. That's or in a way which is then deceiving someone else, or could in any way possibly create problems in the future. This is the thing is to grow up. And to stop, acting like little 13-year-olds, pearlescent, be mature in all actions of our life, including our sexuality. I mean, I think it's very ironic that these really ridiculous sex clubs are called adult. I mean, it's the most childish thing in the world, and how they could possibly consider that is adult behavior, really. Watching women take their clothes off is adult. You get over that when you're 13, you hope. So it's a matter of being responsible and mature, and not just impulsive and acting on, just from purely, animal desires, but really looking at the situation. If then that's the point. That one should bring one's sexual conduct onto the path. Right? I mean, the Buddha was not against sexual relationships, but they should be part of the path. It shouldn't be like a binge that you do and then you come back and that you're all sorry about, If we are genuinely following a path, we should bring our sexuality onto the path. It's not an exception. Do you understand? That's why it's a precept. It doesn't mean that you cannot have sex outside of marriage or this or that or the other. It's not what it's concerned with. What it's concerned with is really bringing all our conduct onto the path and looking at how this affects another being, not using another being purely as if they were, they were not a person. I mean, their emotions are concerned here also. We're not animals. We don't just copulate with anything when we feel like it. We have to be mature. We have to grow up. On the other hand, also, we shouldn't end up becoming neurotic and, too Puritan about this. It's the middle way between extremes. But I'm sure if basically one really is trying to be honest with oneself, then one can be honest also with other people. If one does have, a real breakdown in one's precepts, I mean, I can't imagine what you could possibly want to do which would break it, but if you do, then yes, repair it again. You don't have to go and do it in a formal ceremony, but when, not just sex, any precept, if we break it, we should, if we seriously break a precept, then we, first of all, we feel sorry. We feel remorse. We're sorry about that. Then we make, if we are genuinely sorry, then it follows that we will make the aspiration not to do that again. Right? So there is first of all the remorse, and then the aspiration that one will definitely try not to do like that anymore. Then one can do, if it's something quite serious, a purificatory practice, such as in the Tibetan system, the prostration to the 35 Buddhas, Vajrasattva, the Nyungne fasting rituals, and so on. But otherwise, just to, confess to oneself that one did that, one is really sorry about that, one will try to do better next time, and then take the precepts, to oneself again, and carry on. That's enough. I mean, really, these are all intended as being the practice of someone who really is seriously involved in walking the path. But, all of us have breakages from time to time because, these are just guidelines. So it's like, a little child, a baby starting to learn to walk. It stands up and it holds on support, and its legs are a bit weak, but it's trying, and it walks, and then it falls down. And then it pulls itself up again, and then it walks, and then it falls down. And so this is how it goes. It walks, and each time a little bit further, a little less wobbly. And the point is that however many times the child falls, it always pulls itself up again and starts walking. It never gets to the point where it sits down and says to itself, I can't do this. Clearly, my legs are too weak. Other people have strong legs. Me. Hopeless. I'm not going to even try. I'm just going to sit here and they can carry me. No child thinks like that. Every child thinks if they can do it, I can do it. So however many times it pulls itself up and falls down, next time it will walk that bit further until it's running around everywhere. So this is the point, that however many times we fail, we pull ourselves up and try again. Until we become strong. Until we are walking and not even thinking that we are walking. So we are keeping the precepts, not even really thinking we're keeping the precepts because they're so natural to us. Yes, I know. It is we live, she's saying that, daily she has this challenge with the precept not to kill. Her dog has fleas. The house has mosquitoes. She's concerned with also the mosquitoes biting her children and so forth. And of course, this is something which, living in this world, and especially in a tropical country where there are a lot of insects, I'm sure in the summer, is something which people have to face. And again, I think it's a matter of our own conscience. As much as possible, we try not to take life. If we have to take life, like getting rid of fleas from the dog, we should do it with regret. We should not be pleased about it. And in many cases, I mean, I'm not saying with fleas on the dog, but often if for example, the house is infested by certain insects and things like this, actually, if one asks the insects to leave, they might do so. I mean, I'm not going into that now, but actually, there is a way of asking these beings, very politely, that if they don't leave, then you're going to unfortunately have to kill them, and therefore, as they don't want to die and you don't want to kill them, will they please leave? And if one does that skillfully, often, and gives them time, you have to give them, like 24 hours to get the word out. Actually, they do go. For example, in our nunnery, in our kitchen, we had so many cockroaches, and they were everywhere, including in the refrigerator and in the oven. I mean, cockroaches can live anywhere, of course. And so we didn't know what to do about them. So what we did was we captured one, and then we said to it, look here, I mean, first you have to praise them, right? You have to appreciate them. So we said, well, it's incredible. You are so ancient. You have been here since the beginning of time, and you're probably, when we've all gone, you're still going to be here. It's incredible. Your powers of survival are amazing. Well done. But this is our kitchen, and, actually we cannot share the same space. Sorry. And if you don't leave, then, we're going to have to come and spray you. And we really don't want to do that, and you wouldn't want that to happen. So you please go and tell all your people, that your commune, that you're going to have to go. Please leave. And they did. You see, next day, no more cockroaches. So it does work. You have to, either, basically it's better if you can segregate one, even with mice or any of this, if you can get one and talk to them, and sort of course they don't understand your words, but you give them a mental picture of what you're talking about, and meditate on it, and really try to communicate what you're saying, and that there is danger for them, and that please to leave, then they do. I mean, animals and insects are intelligent. We underrate them. Because they cannot speak in our language, we think they cannot communicate. One time I read a book about a man who was told to look after this dog, who was a German Shepherd dog. And they said, this dog really is very intelligent. Don't underrate him. And yeah, it's a dog. But after a while he thought, no, this dog really is quite intelligent. And so he thought, I cannot speak to him just using language. So what he did was he sat down in front of the dog, and he looked at the dog in the eyes, and he tried to empty his mind. In other words, he tried to meditate. And just to see if he could communicate with this dog beyond language. And what he got eventually, I mean, it took a bit of time, but eventually the message he got was, you human beings are really dumb. You have become so enamored of language that you can no longer communicate. You've cut yourself off from the whole animal kingdom. You don't know how. We have given up on you. We can't communicate with you anymore because of, we have given over to language. If I can't speak somebody's language, we don't understand them anymore. And yet genuine communication is beyond language. And so based on this, he started to try to communicate with other beings, including insects. And so this is what we were trying to see if it worked, what he recommended. And it does work. It does work. But you have to give it a bit of time, give them 24 hours. Even in Lahul, I thought, okay, let's try this, because some people say that plants also have their own level of intelligence. So I was raising turnips and potatoes in my little garden at the cave. And so I thought, let's try this. So I sat down with the turnips and I looked at certain turnips. Turnip is a kind of root. It's turnip. So I sat down with them and I visualized, I mean, I looked at a certain and not the others, just this lot. And I said, well, look here, turnips, you know, your time has come. Thank you very much for growing so beautifully, but now you need to sustain me in my retreat. And I'm very grateful to you for your sacrifice, but please understand that now, you know, I have to pull you up. So thank you very much. And then next day, I went back to pull them up. And because it was fairly heavy soil, usually you feel a resistance when you pull up. But the ones which I had visualized, I just pulled them and just kind of and so I was so interested in this that there was no resistance, they just came up, that I tried another one beside it that I had not focused on. And those, again, you felt that pull, they weren't ready to come up. So the point is that the whole world is intelligent. But on the whole, Buddhism draws the line at those beings which can move, you know, for our consideration, because otherwise, like the Jains, who were a contemporary order at the time of the Buddha, we would just end up starving ourselves to death, because everything has life. Yes, but sometimes it's difficult, you know, to share our space. But I mean, for example, she's concerned because the mosquitoes might, you know, bite her child. It's very, you know, sometimes people, you know, especially if they're really practicing sincerely, then they open their space to everything. And whatever comes in is welcome. So if the mosquitoes want to eat, then let them eat. If they're only taking a drop of blood, what difference, you know? So one is open to that. But that is a little bit asking more than most people are able to manage, especially when they have children and they're concerned. But of course, you know, most animals and insects, you know, they're getting on with their life, we're getting on with our life. We share this planet together. Yes. And, you know, the idea that everything has to be so sanitized, maybe that is not true. Maybe it's a cycle, you know, that we each are feeding off each other. So again, everybody has to come to their own decisions about this, you know, how far they can go and how open they are to appreciating the preciousness of all life. I'm trying to find something which has relevance to what we're talking about. But well, this is sort of vaguely what we're talking about. When you are speaking about demolishing negative thoughts and emotions and cultivating positive ones, isn't that a dualistic way of speaking and thinking? Yes, but we are living in a world of dualism. when we are in a state of primordial awareness, there is no negativity, because spontaneously our mind is the very essence of wisdom and compassion. But while we are living on our conceptual level, which is the relative, conventional level, then everything is a duality. I mean, there's I and there's you. That's a duality to start with. And what is obscuring us from recognizing our ultimate goodness, which goes beyond the duality of good or negative or positive, is actually our negative thinking. That is what causes us and others to suffer. I mean, that's the fact of the matter. As long as we have greedy, grasping minds, arrogant minds, minds which are full of anger, irritation, hatred, aversion, or which are jealous and envious and fearful, that is like a poison in the system. And it causes us to suffer, and it causes others to suffer. I mean, that's the fact of the matter. Dualistic or not, that's the fact. And therefore, we have to find a way to transform that darkness of the mind into light. Because it's not inherent in our nature, but it's there, and it has to be dealt with. And all Buddhist schools are, I mean, all spiritual paths are dealing with how to deal with this negative within us and transform it into something which is positive and helpful. And there are many levels of doing that, but all of it ultimately is to come back to our true nature, which there are no problems with. But our relative, ordinary, conventional mind revolving around the ego is a big problem for ourselves and for others, because it is pervaded by these poisons. And this is why, again, we need to observe the mind. One of the reasons is so that we see how much this is true. Normally we're not even aware of it. But as we become more aware, so then we become more careful. So, of course, it's dualistic, but, until we really get back to our true nature, then we are living in a world of dualism. So don't worry about it. Just get to work, reading. Now, none of this is mostly to do with meditation, which is not what we're talking about here. These are all meditation questions. That's why I'm separating them to the point where we get to meditation. Well, here is a direct question, which is regarding drugs. What does the tradition say about a shaman's taking of drugs? Well, of course, the tradition doesn't really talk about it much, because it wasn't part of in the Buddha's time. It doesn't seem to have been a part of anybody's spiritual practice. I would say that So this would also therefore only be a matter of personal opinion, because it doesn't really talk about a shamanistic use of drugs in a traditional text, as far as I know. I think that, again, as far as the shamans are concerned, there are shamans and then there are shamans. And that there are certain shamans who do use hallucinogenic drugs as a platform to jump to a higher consciousness. The problem is that sometimes, if one is not careful, as with people who were taking LSD in the good old days, sometimes people taking acid, it would open their minds to a whole other reality. And then they would stop taking the drug but get interested in meditation and other spiritual paths. Those who carried on with the drug often ended up in a whole other state of mind which was not really very helpful. And because the shamans do have a path, and for some of them there is a valid path for where they're trying to go. But I think that many of the people nowadays who follow that path, it's just to get a high. And real mind training is not about getting highs. This is always the problem. I mean, I have known people who have been on that sort of a path, and you can see how they always want experiences. And if they're not getting experiences, then they regard that as not anything happening. Whereas in Buddhism, they make a big difference between experiences, nyam, and realizations, tokpa. And so they are not seeking experiences. Experiences can come, but that is not what you're looking for. You're looking for something beyond experiences, genuine realization of the nature of the mind. And so the problem with this relying on hallucinogenic drugs is that, as I say, often what happens is that then without something happening, people, they don't consider that, well, they get bored, basically. I mean, just sitting and looking at your breath is boring. It's much more exciting to ingest something, and then you have all these visionary trips. But that's not the point. So, I think if you had a very, very skillful guide, maybe it could lead to something, but I'm not always sure that where they're going is where we would want to go to. Anyway, in Buddhism, it's considered to be that you should do it yourself without the need for anything external, imbibing it to help you along the way. These are all on meditation, sorry. Oh, well, I'm so glad you're asking all these questions on meditation. I mean, this is good. But right now we're dealing with ethics. I don't know. I'm not Atisha. Why does Atisha separate between decreasing disturbing emotions as an accomplishment and wishes and wants as a sign of accomplishment? Why separate in this manner? Well, ask Atisha. Maybe, I don't know. Boaz?
It's like the nimitta, no?
sign. Right. I wonder if that's what they're saying. You could be quite right there. Yeah, it could be that. Ta, it says. So when we practice, especially when you're practicing meditation, at certain time there are certain signs which appear. So the first one is about your siddhis. Remember, we were saying, which many people used to think of as a kind of magical powers or clairvoyant powers. So he's saying that is the decrease of our disturbing emotions. And then the signs as we're going along, at certain points, especially in shamatha meditation, there are certain nimitta, there are certain signs which arise. And most people think of that in terms of light or visions and so forth. And so again, he's turning it round and saying, no, forget all that as signs. The real sign of accomplishment is that our wishes and wants decrease. So each time he's just spinning it on its head. You know, it's not these fancy things. That's not it. Getting clairvoyant powers and visions and the experiences of light and bliss and all that sort of thing. That's not it. Are the afflictions of the mind growing less? Are our incessant needs and wants and greeds decreasing? This is the real sign that we're getting somewhere. So it's I think that this is the point he's trying to make there, exactly that the real sign of progress on the path is the fact that our minds are becoming more pure, actually. That the mind is becoming released from the cage of our usual desires and greeds and wishes and wants and this endless cycle. It's calming down. It's opening up. So the way that he expresses, he was a very great master, Atisha. And his method of explaining things at a time when everybody was, as I say, very, very fascinated with all these wonders. And especially in the Tantra, I mean, if you read the biographies of any of the great practitioners of those days, not just Milarepa, but all the people around at that time, it's full of miracles. It's full of wondrous visions and deities coming and speaking to them and taking them off. And I mean, the whole thing is full of wonders. And in the midst of it all, there is Atisha saying, forget that. That doesn't matter. What matters is, are we actually cleaning up our act or not? Are we really becoming less compelled by our negativities? Are we really becoming kinder, more compassionate? Are we really just developing a good heart? Because on the basis of the good heart, all the other qualities will rise. But without that as a foundation, then it's very shaky. However, I mean, we know that today, many of the more famous Hindu gurus, I mean, everybody in India knows this. It's not any secret. So many of the very famous Hindu gurus who had many, many powers were nonetheless, especially towards their latter part of their lives, surrounded by scandals. Buddhists also. I mean, you know, there's different kinds of scandals, but I mean, all of them. There's so many scandals. I mean, if you look, it's. Yes, men. Yes. Well, yeah, she said that. Yes, I mean, there are so many scandals. You know, these great teachers, these great gurus. You know, so many wonderful qualities, and yet, you know, even the most basic conduct, they can't get it into. You know, and it causes so much grief, so much pain, so much confusion, because the basic ethical conduct is not flawless. It's not pure. So also it gives rise to a lot of hypocrisy. Pretending to be one thing, behind the scenes doing another. One time I was at a meeting of Western Buddhist teachers with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And one very prominent Western teacher said to His Holiness, what does one do about the discrepancy, the difference between when one is sitting on the Dharma throne teaching and how one is behind the scenes in ordinary life? And His Holiness looked blank and said, what? And he said, well, you know, how you present yourself when you're sitting there on the throne and how you're acting when you get off the throne behind the scenes. And His Holiness thought, and then he said, if there is any difference between how you are on the throne and how you are behind the scenes, then you have no right to be sitting on that throne. And this is true, we all know this. So how come they don't know this? You know, and so this is why, you know, Atisha is saying, don't be dazzled by all this wonderful outer manifestation. Get your conduct pure, so that there is no hypocrisy between when you're sitting on the throne and behind the scenes.
Israel, we have now, and I don't know, for quite a few years, to deal with so much corruption from people that are supposed to be handling public affairs, and they do it in such a wrong way, and we don't know how to begin to talk with them.
Oh, come to India. Corruption in public places. I mean, this is all around the world, my love, not just in Israel. And you name it, they've got it.
As mentioning this at break time, there's the Lama Tibetan Lama who went to San Francisco, named Chungpan,
Yeah, Chulun Tongpa.
Yeah, and I have a problem like with him because how he acted in his life was certainly didn't seem to be ethical, and to put it mildly. I mean, he died of liver failure, I think, from his alcohol consumption, and not only and after marrying one of his students, he then slept around with the rest of them openly. I mean, not deceiving his wife. I don't think he's very happy about it.
No, so he's discussing about the unethical conduct of Chugam Trungpa Rinpoche, who everybody knows was, I don't know if he and Atisha would have gotten on, but maybe they would have. Yeah.
I mean, can I respect his text? Because, or put him aside saying this is not a Lama I can respect and therefore I'm not going to...
So the question therefore is, of course his books were very brilliant and benefited many, many people. So can one trust what he has to say, or should one put them aside? You know, my Lama Khamtrul Rinpoche knew Trungpa Rinpoche in Tibet, and then when they were exiled into India, Trungpa Rinpoche and Akong Rinpoche stayed with my Lama and his community for a year or so. And then eventually he left to go to Delhi to join this English woman who was starting a school for young incarnate lamas. And then from there, he eventually went to Oxford and forward. So my Lama knew him very well, also back in Tibet. And so I asked him, well, what do you think of Trungpa Rinpoche? And he thought. And then he said, at that level, it is very difficult to know. Wait 20 years and look at his students. And it has to be said that although some of Trungpa Rinpoche's students became alcoholic following their Lama, nonetheless, the majority of his students are very, very solid Dharma practitioners. Some of the main teachers of Buddhism in America today, Pema children, and you know, many actually were direct students of Trungpa Rinpoche. They themselves don't know why he acted the way he did, but nonetheless the transmission which he gave was very valid, and they live in tremendous devotion and respect to him and gratitude for what he transmitted in the West. I mean, despite the fact he was very wild, he transmitted a Dharma which was very pure, actually, and benefited many, many beings. So it's up to you whether you study his books or not. But I think at that level, it is very difficult for us to judge. So I'm glad he's not my Lama. My Lama was a very, very pure monk and never caused me any doubts about anything he did. Everything was perfect Buddha activity in his conduct, his speech, and his mind was liberated beyond words. But that was my good fortune. But nonetheless, people who are very, very deep and profound students of the Dharma had as their guide someone like Trungpa Rinpoche, and they only benefited. So who are we to say? You know, this is the point. Judge not that ye be not judged.
Well, they do say though that you should...
But exactly, that's the other side of it, is that nonetheless the tantric texts especially say that one should examine a teacher up to 12 years, because once one commits, one should be committed. But of course, then again, if you see a Lama who, despite the fact that one has made that commitment, then one recognizes that actually they have very strong character flaws and maybe are using their position to be abusive in any ways, then again one should be very cautious. It's a whole, I mean, really it's a minefield, this whole guru-chela relationship. And I mean, I think it's something which needs much, much further discussion and to be brought out into the open, because a lot, I mean, most teachers, I mean, the majority of teachers are exactly what they claim to be and don't claim to be, because, you know, most teachers don't claim much for themselves. And you know, are definitely highly trustworthy and no problem at all. But of course there is always the minority. Fortunately, they are still the minority, although there are too many of them, who, as Jung said, you know, the brighter the light, the deeper the shadow. And some of them definitely have very strong shadows, which they themselves are not acknowledging. And it's a minefield, I tell you. Not at this point. I'm on the air. In any case, I mean, you know, often people don't want to name names. It's not about naming names. It's about getting people more aware of the perimeters of how far they have to trust, especially women, that before a relationship with the teacher becomes abusive. And it's becoming more and more common as more and more teachers go into a culture which is not their own, and they mistake it. They don't understand what's really going on there, and therefore they engage in conduct which is simply not admissible and should be stopped. But it needs to come also from their side. You know, as long as their authorities are not standing up. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, during this meeting with the Western teachers, spoke on this matter. And he said, look, if you know of anything like this going on, you please tell me. If you don't want to stand up and say it in public, write me a note. Because I go around the world visiting many Dharma centers. If I know this sort of conduct is happening, I will not visit that center. Because when I visit, that endorses that center. And so I need to know, because people won't tell me. If you don't tell me, how am I going to know? But still one sees him visiting centers which he really shouldn't. And he must know, because it's all over the internet. So I don't know. But it's something which has eventually to be addressed, because it, you know, this is not something which is accordant with how the Buddha Dharma should be presented to the world. I think we have to finish here. So could you please dedicate?